Emotional eating is a phrase that has been used so many times it has almost stopped meaning anything. You've heard it, you've probably applied it to yourself, and yet, something about it has never quite fit. Because the thing that happens at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday after a hard meeting does not feel the same as what happens on a Sunday afternoon when there's nothing wrong, exactly, and you still end up in the kitchen. And neither of those feels the same as the eating that happens when something good occurred, when you finally made it through the week, and something in you insists on a reward it cannot name. These are not the same thing. They have different textures, different triggers, different things they're actually asking for. And the reason that most frameworks for emotional eating have not helped is simple. They've been treating 5 different experiences as one. This video gives each of them a name. By the end of this, you'll have a map. Not a plan, not a protocol. A map. One that describes what is actually happening inside you, with enough precision that the urge stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like information. There are 5 types. They are distinct. And at least one of them is going to sound like something you've lived but never had words for. Here is what collapses when everything gets called emotional eating. You reach for tools that treat it as one thing. You try to pause before eating and ask, am I actually hungry? And the answer is clearly no, and you eat anyway, and now you feel worse because you knew and still couldn't stop. You try to identify the emotion. You sit with it. You feel vaguely stressed or vaguely nothing, and the feeling doesn't resolve, and the kitchen is right there. You try intuitive eating, and it helps with some situations and is completely useless in others, and you don't understand why. The reason is not that you failed the tools. The reason is that the tools were built for one kind of emotional hunger, and you were bringing them 5. Research on emotion regulation consistently shows that the more specifically a person can identify an emotional state, not just, I'm stressed, but what kind of stress, where it lives, what it's doing, the more effectively they can respond to it. That specificity is not something most of us were taught about food and emotions. We were taught hungry or not hungry. Occasionally, are you eating your feelings? That is not a map. That is barely a compass. What follows is a map. Type 1. Stress discharge hunger. This is the one that arrives not because the body is empty, but because it is full of activation, of cortisol, of something that has been running at high frequency since morning. The felt quality is important here. It is not quite hunger. It is more like a restlessness that has migrated into the stomach. A buzzing. A need to do something with the hands or the mouth or both. The eating doesn't have to taste good. That's often a signal that this is what's happening. You're eating past flavor, past enjoyment, almost mechanically. What stress discharge hunger is actually asking for? A way to discharge the activation. The body wants to move through something. Food works because it provides a physical action, a sensory input, a brief lowering of the physiological alarm. It is not the only thing that works, but in the moment it is the fastest. Type 2. Comfort hunger. This one has a different texture entirely. Where stress discharge feels like restlessness, comfort hunger feels like a reaching for warmth, for softness, for something that resembles care. There is usually a sensory preference attached to it. Warm foods. Soft foods. Foods that feel like someone made them for you, even when no one did. The felt quality here is not agitation. It is something closer to a small hollowness, a desire to feel held that the body has learned to translate into a request for food. What comfort hunger is actually asking for? Safety. Warmth. The somatic experience of being cared for. Food delivers a version of this, a partial version, which is why it doesn't quite satisfy, because what it's reaching for isn't in the food. Type 3. Emptiness hunger. This is different from the first two because it is not driven by too much of something. It is driven by not enough, the felt quality, a flatness, a low-grade absence, not pain exactly, more like the opposite of aliveness, the kind of afternoon that has no particular problem in it and still feels like something is missing. The eating here is often described as almost automatic, grazing without real appetite, reaching for flavor or texture or sensation because the inner landscape is too quiet. What emptiness hunger is actually asking for? Stimulation, connection, meaning, or some combination, something that fills the space. Food fills it briefly, and briefly is often enough to take the edge off the flatness until it isn't. 3 types, 3 completely different textures, and if you've noticed that you recognized yourself in more than one of them, that is not evidence of a complicated problem. That is evidence that you're a person with a nervous system that learned to use a single tool for multiple situations. The pattern makes sense. The next two types are harder to see, not because they are rarer. They may actually be the most common, but because they operate below the level of conscious emotion. By the time they appear as an eating urge, the feeling that triggered them has often already been put somewhere inaccessible. Type 4. Suppression hunger. This is the eating that happens when there is no identifiable emotion. When nothing is obviously wrong, when there's no stress you can point to, no sadness in the room, and the urge appears anyway, and it doesn't make sense. The felt quality here is particular. A blankness, almost neutral. An absence of feeling that somehow generates an appetite. What is actually happening? There is an emotion present, but it has been processed out of awareness, suppressed before it could fully form. And the body, which does not have the luxury of suppression in the same way the mind does, registers the energy of that emotion and reaches for its most reliable regulation tool. This is the type that most confuses people, because it breaks the assumed logic. I eat emotionally, so I should be able to identify the emotion. When you can't, when there's nothing there, the assumption is that the eating must be about something else. Habit, addiction, boredom. It is often none of those things. It is the nervous system managing something the conscious mind didn't permit itself to feel. Type 5. Reward and recompense hunger. This is the one most often labeled as lack of willpower. And that label is precisely wrong. The felt quality here is different from all the others, because it doesn't feel bad. It feels almost reasonable. I held it together today. I did the hard things. I kept it all moving. I deserve something. What is actually happening? The nervous system has been sustaining high-functioning performance for an extended period. Emotional labor, suppression of needs, management of everything that had to be managed. And at the end of it presents a bill. The eating that follows is not weakness. It is the body insisting on recompense for what it's spent. This type often appears at predictable times. End of the work week, end of a difficult stretch, after a period of successful restriction. And because it feels earned, the eating often continues past the point of satisfaction. The body isn't convinced by one portion. It experienced a significant debt. It wants payment. Here is what matters about types 4 and 5. They are not the most broken types. They are the most sophisticated. They require more from the nervous system to recognize, because they operate in territory the mind has already decided not to look at. The person who experiences type 4 is not someone who has no emotional awareness. They are someone whose emotional awareness was trained to move very fast, to process and set aside, to keep going. The person who experiences type 5 is not someone who lacks discipline. They are someone who gave everything they had and whose body is doing exactly what bodies do when the bill comes due. The pattern makes sense. Not because it's working, but because it was always trying to. If having these 5 types named feels like a beginning, like now there's a question worth asking, there is a resource in the description that takes this further. It is called the Emotional Hunger Decoder, and it was built specifically for this. A simple, non-judgmental framework for identifying which type is present in the actual moment. Not after, not in reflection, but when the urge first appears. 7 days, 15 minutes or less, entirely private. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. A map does not stop you from going somewhere. That's not what it's for. What a map does, it tells you where you are. And knowing where you are changes the relationship to the movement that follows. Here is the one thing worth practicing. Not as a rule, not as a condition on eating, but as a small act of curiosity. In the moment before eating, when you notice the urge, pause for just a few seconds and ask, which of the 5 textures does this most resemble? Not to stop, not to judge, to know. Is it a restlessness, a reaching, a flatness? Is there nothing identifiable beneath it? A blankness? Or does it have that specific quality of having earned something? You don't have to answer correctly. There's no wrong answer. The point is not accuracy. It's the pause itself, the moment of curiosity before the automatic. Because here is what that pause does over time. It builds the only thing that actually changes this, which is self-knowledge. Not willpower, not control. The specific, granular, earned knowledge of what is happening inside you and why. Research on emotion regulation consistently points to something called affect labeling. The simple act of naming an emotional state as one of the few interventions that measurably reduces its intensity. Not eliminates it, reduces it. Creates a small gap between the state and the response. 5 names. 5 textures. That is not a small thing to carry out of a video. There is an internal objection worth naming here, because it is almost certainly present. I've had insights before, I've understood things before. And understanding hasn't changed the behavior. That is true. And it is important to hold on to. Understanding is not the same as changing. The nervous system is slow. The patterns are old. The gap between knowing and doing is real, and it doesn't close in a single afternoon. But understanding changes the relationship to the behavior. And the relationship is where everything else begins. You are not, after watching this, someone who doesn't know what's happening inside them. That is a different person than the one who clicked play, not because you're broken, because you learned. If you want to take what's here into real time, into the actual moment when one of these textures appears, the emotional hunger decoder in the description was built exactly for that. The link is there whenever you're ready. No pressure, no perfect timing. Which of these 5 landed hardest? And have you been treating it like something else your whole life? You came here because something about the word emotional eating has never quite accounted for your specific experience. That gap was real. It wasn't a gap in your self-awareness. It was a gap in the language available to you. 5 types. 5 completely different mechanisms. 5 different things the body was asking for, with the only tool it knew was reliable. The stress it needed to discharge. The warmth it needed to feel. The aliveness it needed to find. The feeling it could not permit itself to have. The debt it needed someone to acknowledge. None of those are chaos. Every single one of them is information. The eating was never random. It was always trying to communicate something. You just didn't have the translation. You have it now. That does not mean tomorrow is easy. The nervous system doesn't update overnight. The patterns that took years to build don't dissolve in 15 minutes. But you are standing in a different place than you were when this started. You have names. You have a framework that belongs to you now, that you can carry into the next moment it's needed. And when the urge appears, when you notice one of those textures arriving, you will have something you didn't have before. Not a rule, not a restriction. A question. Which one is this? That question is the beginning of something that is not about the food. Food was the fastest thing that worked. It still might be, sometimes. But now you know what it was working for. And that is not a small thing to know. One meal at a time, one moment at a time. Not one diet at a time,